The S&P 500, broadest measure of the market, up 2.5%, and the NASDAQ with all the tech stocks nearly 3% higher. Doug Flynn here with analysis from Flynn, Zito Capital Management. So, yeah, Trump trade and all the rest was the conversation going in. Get to some more of that in a moment, but stock market first. What about the Dow today?
Yeah, I mean, well, stocks were up, the dollar was up, Bitcoin was up, and it was really up on a number of things. The stocks were up on, well, first of all, certainty. You know, the last 10 elections, 9 of them were positive to the point of 1 year later, the median was up about 17%. So certainty is really important. We now have that. Whatever you think of it, we have it. It was also on the renewed growth aspects, probably increased growth, less regulation, tax cuts getting extended, and merger and activity increasing. You know, right now, I just read a stat that somewhere between 40 and 45% of the value of the S&P, the firms that make that up, are under some kind of DOJ investigation. So if you're talking about almost half of the value of the S&P under investigation, getting rid of some of that, maybe a lot of it is warranted, but maybe there is some there that there isn't, that gets that out of the way. And I think the market was just like, let's go, here we go.
You mentioned some of the other movements we saw. In the bond market, the 10-year Treasury note, you and I have had this conversation a number of times before the election, that's kind of the benchmark for when you're looking at interest rates and what they make of what's going on in the world. It's more rise there, right, at least in the yield as people sell bonds. So what's going on with that? What message does it give us? I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, people are afraid of this Trump tariff plan. But to me, if they were really, really afraid, it would be through the roof on this. There seems to be some sort of a bet on Wall Street that, you know, for all the bluster, that he's not going to be as extreme as he's said he would be in the campaign. In other words, he won't do what he says he's going to do. Is that what you're picking up too?
There is some of that. I think it's really a combination of potential higher inflation, but because of potential higher growth, which puts this into the fact that if there's going to be higher growth and higher inflation, the Fed really doesn't need to cut as much. And so rates are probably due to be a little bit higher than anyone anticipated. And I think that's what this is. It's sniffing out the fact that maybe it'll be there. Now, listen, if that doesn't happen, then rates will settle back down. This is all sort of in anticipation of that. And I do suspect that rates are probably a little bit bumping up against that, and then they'll kind of settle down as everybody kind of gets comfortable with what's going on.
What about Bitcoin? When something like this moves, you know, sometimes, so it's just a short-term move, but maybe now that Trump is in there, now J.D. Vance is a big supporter as well, crypto, that this is going to be a new environment for it. Your thoughts on Bitcoin as kind of an alternative investment and whether people should be looking at it? I know a lot of people obviously already are.
Sure. The trade today was really because of sort of the Biden administration really put the SEC and the chairman again suing the Bitcoin crypto firms and whatnot. And Trump, I think his quote was he wants the U.S. to be the Bitcoin superpower in the world. And so, you know, that really puts people onto that he's pro Bitcoin, and that really moved that up to an all-time high. So there really aren't fundamentals here in Bitcoin. A lot of this is just a trade. And so if that is true and there's less regulation and this gets more adopted and you don't have this anti-Bitcoin. Look, Trump said he's going to fire the SEC chairman. So if that gets out of the way, then that paves the way for potentially higher Bitcoin with less issues. And I think that's a lot of what happened today here.
Yeah, I don't know how much Trump himself cares about Bitcoin or knows much about it. I know J.D. Vance is into it, but he certainly campaigned on that. And there's a lot of people in the coalition that cared about it. Speaking of his coalition, how about Elon Musk, one of the biggest names in the business world, of course, but now suddenly the richest man in the world becomes one of the biggest names in the political world. I didn't see how it closed, but I know Tesla was up a lot earlier. This idea that you're going to go out and buy a car, there's Tesla, so what was it, 6%? Okay. So you're going to go out and buy a car based on somebody's politics. You know, I would have thought at first electric cars and, you know, Elon's with the conservatives, that might hurt him, but then it also opens up a whole new market. So your view?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think he did make something like $15 billion today, Elon, just from that pop in the stock. Not a bad day at the office. But, you know, he has actually come out and said, end the EV subsidies that you give out, the $7,500 per car. Let it compete in and of itself. And I think the big difference here is he wants to compete freely and fairly. Of course, if you're going to offer incentives, they're going to take them. But the point is, get that out of the way. Let people choose if they want an EV. I drive an EV because I want to. My wife doesn't. We have, 1 and 1. That's good. Maybe that's what works. But let people decide. That the forced mandate that everybody has to do something is kind of what we're moving away from. And I think that's probably the way that this is going to play out as things go on. And there is competition for other EVs, and certainly there's competition in the auto industry, no doubt about it.
All right. So overall, it sounds like you're relatively optimistic, or it's a wait and see now, economically, market. Real quick thoughts before we wrap.
Really interestingly, the valuations which were extended before are even more extended. So a lot of growth really does have to happen. Mm-hmm. If they're right, this is warranted. If they're not, then things will come back down. You'll have some other opportunities. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in bonds with the yields that you have right now as things settle down there as well.
All right. And take a little time after an election like this. We often see some moves that are real quick, then they unravel or change a little bit. All right, Doug, thank you. Doug Flynn there.